On any given day, my biggest worries might be missing an alarm, forgetting to bring a packed lunch, or missing the early train. I mean, tiny violin much? Because if I take a step back and look at the timeline of our planet, I'd realize it's kind of a miracle that we're here in the first place. Earth has been closer to saying adios way more times than most people realize. For billions of years, the planet itself has tried to hit the reset button with natural but equally destructive phenomena like volcanic eruptions, cosmic rocks, and extreme ice ages. And this was all before humans were here. Once we arrived, the threats would stop, right? No. Not really. We've had diseases that took out millions, and when tech inevitably advanced, we had nuclear weapons that could literally have blown our entire world up. What makes these moments so interesting is that they really were close calls, with the margin of error actually much narrower than you might guess. In many cases, our survival came down to random luck or even down to one single individual making a single decision. Let's take a look at the wilder moments when the world almost ended. The Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962 brought the world to high alert as tensions between the United States and the Soviet Union brought them close to nuclear conflict. Tensions peaked when American U-2 spy planes captured photographic evidence of Soviet nuclear missile sites being rapidly constructed in Cuba. U.S. President John F. Kennedy enacted a strict naval quarantine around the island nation, and across the globe, ordinary families hoarded canned goods and converted basements into makeshift fallout shelters. Kennedy also went on national television to issue a stark warning: "It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union." After a tense 13 days of negotiation, the crisis ended on the 28th of October, when both leaders were able to come to an agreement. Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev agreed to withdraw the nuclear missiles, and U.S. President John F. Kennedy agreed that the U.S. would not attack Cuba. This near ending of the world occurred during the Cold War, a time of ongoing, tense political rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union. On the morning of November 9, 1979, the high-security bunker at the North American Aerospace Defense Command, NORAD, suddenly moved into a state of maximum emergency. The main computer monitors indicated that an all-out, unprovoked Soviet nuclear strike was making its way across the oceans. The system reported that over 2,200 intercontinental ballistic missiles had been launched simultaneously, targeted directly at major American population centers and military installations. The response was instantaneous. Within minutes, interceptor fighter jets scrambled into the air and nuclear bombers prepared for takeoff. National Security Advisor Zbigniew Brzezinski was woken up at 3 a.m. and told he had less than 10 minutes to notify President Jimmy Carter to authorize an immediate retaliatory strike. Brzezinski was so convinced that he even chose not to wake up his wife, as he believed that it would have been kinder to let her die peacefully in her sleep. But right before Brzezinski called the president, secondary confirmation systems provided a second opinion. Officers checking early warning satellite feeds and secondary coastal radar arrays reported that their screens showed empty skies. It was then revealed that the entire crisis was caused by a simple human mistake. A technician had accidentally loaded a highly realistic training simulation tape into the active mainframe computer network. We were that close to complete annihilation. Imagine being the man who saved the world. That's Stanislav Petrov, a lieutenant colonel in the Soviet Air Defense Forces whose singular decision prevented a nuclear war. While on duty in 1983, the early warning satellite system Petrov was manning rang out, alerting the base of an incoming nuclear missile, with the panel across the wall screaming out, "Launch," in angry red letters. This was an order, commanding Petrov to prepare for retaliation. The blaring panel meant that in just over 20 minutes, the U.S. missiles could reach the Soviet Union. Despite his team starting to panic, Petrov stayed cool-headed and composed as he considered the situation. First, if the U.S. really was sending a missile, they would need to send hundreds of missiles, far from the measly few that the system was picking up, to make a real impact. Second, Petrov also knew that OCO, the system, was prone to making errors. And thirdly, there was a real lack of evidence. There was no telescope, no radar confirmation. All I had to do was to reach for the phone, to raise the direct line to our top commanders, but I couldn't move. I felt like I was sitting on a hot frying pan, he told the BBC. Petrov trusted his instincts and reported the incident to his superiors as a false alarm. His skills of deduction paid off. The satellites had mistaken the glint of sunlight reflecting off the tops of high-altitude clouds for the thermal signatures of missile launches. Petrov has since received international praise, earning the 2013 Dresden Peace Prize and a 2006 award from the Association of World Citizens. He also became the subject of a 2013 Danish documentary film, The Man Who Saved the World. As Europe struggled to recover from the First World War in 1918, a catastrophic strain of H1N1 influenza swept across the globe. Contrary to popular belief, the Spanish flu did not originate in Spain. Modern evidence suggests the flu actually originated in places like Kansas, United States, where young military recruits reported the first cases in early 1918 before being deployed overseas. At the time, medical science had limited knowledge of viruses, and several global health authorities suppressed information regarding how bad the outbreak was to avoid mass panic. Because of the suppression of information, it was incredibly difficult to assess exactly how bad the virus was, and with no vaccines or antibiotics available, doctors were largely powerless to treat it. The pandemic occurred in 3 waves. The first wave was in early 1918, where it was relatively mild. The second mutated and very deadly wave was from September 1918 to January 1919, and the third, lingering wave occurred from the remainder of 1919. By the time the pandemic dissipated, it had killed between 50 and 100 million people worldwide. Australia managed to briefly delay the virus due to strict quarantine protocols, before the virus eventually breached the borders in 1919. It appeared first in Melbourne before spreading to Sydney and Adelaide. The containment measures were very similar to those implemented during COVID-19. Public spaces like schools, churches, theaters, and libraries were shut down, and citizens were required to wear face masks. About 12 to 15,000 Aussies died during the 1919 pandemic as around 40% of the population fell Illinois. During the 14th century, the Black Plague, also known as the bubonic plague, killed more than 25 million people, cutting down Europe's population by at least 1/3. The disease was primarily spread to humans by fleas carrying the bacteria Yersinia pestis, which fed on infected rodents. The disease was then spread easily person to person through coughs and sneezes, similar to the common cold we see today. Some variants of the plague, such as septicemic plague, were especially nasty, and had the capacity to kill an otherwise healthy person within days, and sometimes even in a matter of hours. Centuries after the initial wave came the Third Plague, which took hold during the 19th and 20th centuries. Beginning in the Yunnan region of southwest China in 1855, it quickly spread to Canton and Hong Kong, and then, carried via international trade routes, the plague spread to Japan, Singapore, India, the Americas, and Europe. The first report of the Black Plague in Australia wasn't until 1900, a big perk of being so far away from the rest of the world. However, health authorities and governments were well aware that it was only a matter of time before the disease eventuated in Australia. Because of coordinated containment efforts from health officials, there were relatively few deaths in Australia compared to the impacts felt overseas. In Sydney, the City Council organised dedicated teams to locate and exterminate the urban rat population, with the government paying a bounty of 2 pence per rat delivered to a custom-built incinerator on Bathurst Street. In total, 1,371 cases of the disease were reported in Australia, and 535 deaths. As bad as later asteroid impacts would be, they'd look like minor hiccups compared to this event. Known as the Great Dying, this is the closest Earth has ever come to wiping out life. Unlike a sudden surprise from space, this disaster was driven from within Earth, one of 5 mass extinction events which have wiped out 50 to 90% of all life. Massive volcanic eruptions in a region known as the Siberian Traps flooded an area the size of Australia with molten lava. Think the floor is lava, except the floor is Earth. The eruptions released trillions of tons of greenhouse gases, causing global temperatures to shoot up by roughly 10 degrees Celsius and leaving the oceans extremely acidic. Because of this, toxic bacteria thrived and pumped out hydrogen sulfide, destroying the planet's protective ozone layer. It wiped out 96% of all marine species and 70% of land animals. And when the dust finally settled, it took nearly 10 million years just for the planet's ecosystems to fully recover. Long before humans arrived back in the days of the dinosaurs, a massive asteroid, roughly about 10 to 15 kilometers wide, slammed into what's now known as the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. It instantly vaporized trillions of tons of rock and carved out the massive Chicxulub crater. The initial blast was devastating, but the true killer was the prolonged winter that followed. The crater led to a massive cloud of soot and sulfur so large it blocked out the sun for years. Without sunlight, plants died, food chains collapsed, the age of the dinosaurs ended, and roughly about 75% of all species were wiped out. But here's the wild part, the impact is the exact reason we're all here today. With the giant reptiles out of the picture, the tiny, burrowing mammals that managed to survive the impact stepped out of the shadows and paved the way for humanity. Many years before the times of humans, the very existence of our species was almost taken out by a grueling global ice age known as the Marine Isotope Stage 6 (MIS6) glacial event. Spanning from roughly 195,000 to 130,000 years ago, this event transformed the planet into an arid wilderness. During this period, the African continent grew extremely cold and dry, and the freshwater river systems were replaced by expanding deserts. This, naturally, had a major impact on the environment. Animals migrated and several types of wild plants vanished. The human population dramatically dropped down, and with only a few hundred humans left, it quite literally left our species teetering on the edge of extinction. Because of this, genetic models estimate that our lineage was squeezed through this extreme bottleneck. Modern genetic studies have consistently revealed a lack of genetic diversity in humans when compared to other primates. This means that every person alive today is the direct descendant of the small band of survivors who endured this climate crisis. Basically, this event is literally written in our own DNA. But how did they survive? Archaeologists have discovered that they survived by migrating to the southern coast of Africa, such as Pinnacle Point, and adapting their diets to rely on marine resources like shellfish instead of scarce land animals. Fast forward a little into the future, and the Aegean island of Thera, known today as the tourist destination of Santorini, was the site of the Minoan eruption. In 1600 BC, this volcanic event was one of the most violent explosions recorded in human history and made Vesuvius and Krakatoa look mild by comparison. In fact, it's believed to have been 10 times more powerful than the eruption of Vesuvius. The blast had a volcanic eruption index score of 7, ejected between 28 to 60 cubic kilometers of magma and pulverized rock into the upper atmosphere. It was so forceful that the entire central landmass of the island collapsed inward. It also triggered massive megatsunamis, with walls of ocean water estimated to have reached heights of up to 150 meters. These waves destroyed the coastal ports and naval fleets of Minoan power. At the same time, massive clouds of toxic sulfur dioxide disrupted regional weather patterns, causing widespread famine and crop failures as far away as China. The Minoan civilization never recovered, and this meant they were left vulnerable to the expansion and takeover by the Mycenaean Greeks. Many historians believe this sudden disappearance of a wealthy island empire directly inspired Plato's legendary tale of the lost city of Atlantis. What's even crazier is that it's not the biggest volcano we've ever seen. Supervolcanoes, a volcano which can erupt with more than 1,000 cubic kilometers of material, a magnitude 8 on the VEI, are even bigger. And we all know the likes of Yellowstone, which many believe is overdue for an eruption. And it's believed it's one of 20 supervolcanoes around the planet. The eruption of Mount Tambora was considered one of the most powerful volcanic eruptions in human history. On April 10, 1815, the mountain blew itself apart and sent roughly 45 cubic kilometers of rock, ash, and gas into the atmosphere, although some estimates go as high as 150 cubic kilometers. The ash particles were so significant they covered the stratosphere and blocked out solar radiation. It caused regional temperatures in parts of the northern hemisphere to plummet by as much as 3 degrees Celsius. An estimated 10,000 people living on the island of Sumbawa were killed instantly, and in the following months, tens of thousands more died from starvation and disease. The total death toll is estimated to be more than 90,000 people. 1816, the year after the blast, became globally known as the year without a summer. In China, cold winds and rains destroyed rice crops, and in India, the climate changes triggered a drought that led to the creation and spread of a new strain of cholera. Experts believe Earth is undergoing its sixth mass extinction event. Often referred to as the Anthropocene or Holocene extinction, it's driven by one single species, humans. The reason for the extinction is primarily due to the unsustainable use of land, water, and energy, with unsustainable food production practices and overconsumption contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. Climate change is also a major factor, leading to global warming, rising sea levels, and everything from severe droughts to intense floods. So unfortunately for you and me, it's not over yet. But whether the sixth mass extinction becomes our final chapter remains entirely up to us.